All right. Hello. We have only one attendee so far, so I think we're going to wait a couple more minutes, like 5 minutes. Oh, there we go. There's a ton. I think Peter must be letting them in one by one. Okay, we got Carlos, Caroline, Dustin, Madeline, Nancy, Pat, and Yvonne. Awesome.
Which building is that?
Carol.
Ah, okay.
That's Carroll Tower facing away from the State House. If anyone recognizes, that's Smith Hill. We had a friend of ours take some drone pictures and they are stunning. You gotta love that. I see a lot of familiar people joining in as we wait for everyone to join in. So good evening. Hello. Give me a wave if you can hear me. Hey, hey Dita. Hey, Pat came and went. Yvonne, how you doing? Carlos, are you there? Let's see, can you wave? Ah, Madeline. Carlos waved, woohoo. Who else has got a wave on there? Miss Nancy, what about you? Can you wave? Can you hear me? Miss Pat? All right, oh, we're still waving, awesome, thank you, yay. Oh, there you are, Carlos. Hi, Carlos, nice to see you. It's good to see everyone this evening. I'm starting to recognize some names. I like that. That's a good feeling. Always fun. We got about 9 people on right now. We're expecting a few more, so we're going to give folks a couple more minutes to join in as we were sharing. So just sit tight for a couple more minutes. Oh, Nancy, there you are. Hi, Nancy. Good to see you. And see, we keep getting them jumping on. There they go. We got a couple of new people. It's Murillo, Jonathan, Dustin, hello. I hope you guys told all your friends. Make sure we have a lot of people. We like this one. This is a good session, especially if you're thinking about the program or ready to join. So we're excited about this one. How are we on time, Donna?
Almost 5 minutes.
Okay. We'll give everyone 2 more minutes and then we'll jump in. Does anyone, I'm curious, does anyone have a unit in the picture? Can anyone see their house from this photo on the screen? This is a fun question. So this is Carroll Tower on Smith Street, looking away from the State House towards Smith Hill. Raise your hand if you can see your house or one of your houses. No, Jonathan can't see his. Oh. It's a good shot though. Oh well, no one on the Smith Hill. What's that other neighborhood called, Peter? Is that looking into Wadscuck?
I guess,
Mount-
yeah, probably one Skunk Valley neighborhoods,
Valley,
you know.
mhm.
Yep. Hi, Paula. Good to see you tonight. So yeah, there's a familiar sight for many of you, I'm sure, at least if you don't have a house there, you've driven by there. It's one of my favorites. All right, I'm thinking we should probably get started. We've got about 11 people on so far. So we'll jump in, and if we have any extra people who join us, we'll catch them up. What do you say, Donna? Sound good?
Ready?
All right.
Go.
All right. So welcome, everybody. My name is Ainsley Morriso Cantrell. I'm with the Providence Housing Authority, and I am going to be one of your hosts for this evening with my esteemed colleague, Donna De La Rosa. Say hi, Donna.
Hello.
So we are going to share with you this evening an introduction to the Section 8 program. This is specifically geared towards landlords, not to participants or people who may be interested in getting a voucher. This is strictly for landlords. And we're giving the overview, the skinny on what really goes on in the program and what's happening right now and changes with COVID, things like that. We're going to cover tonight. And then we have some great follow-up sessions that are happening coming soon. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the PHA. I see many of you have been in on some of these sessions already this year and in this fall. And so I apologize. This is a little repetitive, but that's why I'm here. So the Providence Housing Authority is the largest affordable housing provider and landlord in Rhode Island. We have about 2,600 units throughout the city that we own, operate, and self-manage. We also administer a voucher program, which gives participants a voucher, then like a coupon that they take on to the private market, and they go to you or your friends and neighbors, and they rent from them. And the reason that we are doing this program is because we've gotten some special funding from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island. And it's allowing us to work with voucher holders to provide free webinars, to provide monetary incentives, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, for landlords, as well as to help out tenants as needed. And then there's just a ton more that they're doing as part of a pilot program working with the Providence Housing Authority. So this is all kind of part of a bigger program that we're working on, and it's completely supported by Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I'm going to hand it over to Donna De La Rosa, who has years of experience. She's our director of lease housing. And Donna, I'm going to let you jump in right to the meat of the program. Oh, before we get started, I'm going to come back here. Peter, you have a poll to run, I believe. We like to just get a read of the room and figure out who's who in the room. So if you don't mind, could you please, everyone jump in there and tell me, have you ever rented to a Section 8 participant? Now, you could have rented with the Providence Housing Authority, could have been with a different housing authority. We're not limiting this to folks who just have units in Providence. And some of you, I'm thinking many of you may have not. Could have been a while since you've rented too. So waiting and seeing if we have one more response, probably not. So we're going to close it out and I'm going to share the results. And the majority of you have not ever rented to a Section 8 participant or been a part of this program. So that's good, Donna. We have a lot of newbies tonight. I think that's a good sign. And for the yeses, a lot has changed. So you will still learn some things, I'm sure. So we're going to jump right in and Donna's going to take over. Donna, why don't you let everyone know a little bit about yourself?
Good evening, everyone. I've been the director of leased housing for the past 24 years. I've been at the Housing Authority for almost 40. So those of you who who've already participated in the program, I most likely know you. And that's about it. Let's go to the next slide.
And if you haven't participated, you'll get to know her because she is a wealth of knowledge. If you ever need any, she's the one to call. So let's give you, all right, what is the HCV program?
Okay, so the HCV program is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's federally assisted, it's federally funded rental assistance. The Providence Housing Authority takes care of those that are living in Providence. So in total, we have 2,700 vouchers. And 2,270 right now live in the city of Providence. There is a feature where people can move to other communities, and some participants do take advantage of that. Eligibility income-wise for the tenant, they have to be below 50% of the average, the median income for the area. So a person that goes by the household side. So if there's 4 people in the family, it would be about $43,500. They would have to make less than that to become a participant. As they're on the program, the income limits don't apply anymore. So it's just to meet that to get onto the program.
And do most of our people, how close are they to that?
Most of us are extremely low income.
So much lower income than this, right?
Yes.
All right.
So we do have specific programs. We do have a VASH program. Works the same way. Those are specifically for veterans. And we do have a mainstream program that has to include a person with a disability between the ages of 18 and 61. And other than that, those who are on the waiting list could come from different areas. So
those are the generic ones that we have. Those are the typical, what you refer to as Section 8.
yes.
Awesome. I'm trying. All right, so let's talk about our participants, Donna. Who participates in this program right now?
So some people might already have an idea of what they think a typical Section 8 person is. And you may be surprised. 88% of our households are female head of household. 71% are white, 27% African American, and 50% are Hispanic. 45% are actually families. The balance would be an elderly or disabled person or a veteran alone. And the average household size is only 2.4. So we see many more small families than the very, very large ones. Average household age for the household is 49. And almost a quarter of the head of households are over 62. So income-wise, I'm sure a lot of people think that they'd be surprised to know that 55% are on fixed income, either Social Security, their pensions, and 42% of all the households actually are employed. Right now, a portion of them get unemployment benefits, but pre-COVID, they were working. And we have a home ownership program for the families where they can actually buy a house. And we've had 140 people go through the program. And after being on Section 8 for a while, they go and actually are able to buy their own apartment or their own house. The average tenant portion that they have to pay towards the rent is $263. And the Housing Authority, what we pay on their behalf is about $768. That's the average. Okay. So how does it work? The subsidy is based on the income and the family size. So it depends on how many bedrooms they need, what the maximum subsidy is. The tenant will pay a portion of the rent, which the housing authority calculates their part of the income of the rent. And the owner, the tenant will pay it directly to the owner. Then the housing authority will send the landlord the balance of the rent direct deposit, and it's usually in your account on the first business day of the month.
So let's use the example of a pizza pie because everyone loves pizza and it's dinner time and I'm hungry. So let's talk about that. So if you're in the example, you have a 2-bedroom for rent in the city and it's renting for $1,100, and that includes the utilities. The tenant would pay $100. Okay, we would tell the tenant, okay, your income, this is so much of your income, you're going to pay $100. The PHA would pay the difference because it's like a coupon, right? So we're giving the tenant the discount. We're going to give you the difference. So you're still, as a landlord, going to make $1,100. It's just how you broke the pie up and cut those pieces means the tenant pays a little less and they get a smaller slice of that to pay. And we make sure that you still get the whole pie. So I hope you're hungry. Oh, and if we do have questions, I forgot to mention this, Donna. If there are any questions as we go throughout, folks can put them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I know many of you have already found the chat feature, but we do have the chat feature, but we're trying to keep questions into the Q&A box if you could. All right, and Peter's helping us manage those. All right, Donna, back to you. Sorry.
Thank you. The benefits of the program, as we said, the consistency of rent payment is very important. As you know, it's usually deposited for the first working day of the month. And it was especially important during COVID because while a lot of owners, the tenants lost their jobs, they couldn't pay the rent. What happens with the Section 8 tenant is they would call their representative to the housing authority, tell them I lost my job, I have no income this month. The representative will recalculate the rent and we would pay a bigger portion. So the Section 8 landlords really didn't lose any money. We picked up the difference. And then when the tenant the following month received their unemployment, we would recalculate it again. So the tenant would pay 30% of their income and we would pick up the balance. So we had less than a handful of people that had any kind of issue with tenants not paying rent during this unusual time. Tenants, they're very motivated to pay, to keep their voucher. And the reason is, one, they usually wait at least 14 years, unfortunately, to actually get a voucher. They wait on the waiting list. And currently we have 14,000 people on the waiting list right now. So if they lose their voucher, they have a very long time to wait to ever get assistance again. So that's a prime motivator. And if they get evicted, they do lose their voucher. The direct deposit payments from the housing authority, we already talked about that. We have a large pool of tenants always looking for units. We have tenants that want to move from unit to unit just because they maybe outgrew their unit or they want to move to an area with different schools, whatever. And we have new people coming onto the program. So right now we have a mainstream program for families that have a person that has a disability and they're looking for units right now. Another advantage to the program is that when you may have an issue, the staff is always available to work with the landlord and mediate any issues between the tenants and the landlords. And this works out very well. The only restriction to that is that we're unable to share confidential personal information with the owners. We have to protect the tenants' privacy for certain things, but the typical issues that we see might be communication problems between maybe parking issues or, little things that might arise. And the representatives are usually very good at working those issues out. And of course, there's always being a part of the solution in Providence's housing crisis. Everyone knows how tight the market is right now. And it's a great thing to do to help everyone out. So do you want to speak about the incentives, Ainsley?
I would love to talk about some of our very special. So right now, because of that Blue Cross Blue Shield money, we have some very limited time offers that are also great benefits of the program. And I know Donna mentioned being part of the solution to a horrible problem in Providence and across the state with the lack of housing and the consistent rent payments that the PHA can help provide you even during a pandemic. Right now, we're also offering cash incentives. So if you do decide or have an open unit and are able to say rent to one of our mainstream participants who are ready to lease up or to somebody who's moving, we have extra cash incentives that we will give to a landlord who signs a lease with one of our participants to help kind of get them through this program. And because we know that times are tough and that you are a small business, or running a small business. And so we want to make sure we're supporting those. So that's a cash incentive. We're also providing technical assistance. So Donna talked a little bit about how our staff is available to help kind of mediate if a problem arises with a tenant, but we also provide classes like this one. And right now we've been providing webinars on things like your lease, reasonable accommodations. We have connections with different experts in the field. And after this session, we've got another one coming up on inspections, renovations. And then in the spring, we have even more coming up around bookkeeping, tools of the trade, things like that. So that's the technical assistance side of things. And then finally, the state of Rhode Island worked with the United Way to prepare a program called Safe Harbor. And Safe Harbor is a rental assistance program. And if you are a landlord or a tenant, either one can apply. If somebody's been impacted and couldn't pay their rent because of COVID, they will help fill that gap in. So if they're behind 2 months or 3 months, there's some money available through the state being given out by the United Way to fill that gap. And what's great is that if you're part of our program with the PHA and you work with us as a landlord to Section 8 participants, we're actually packaging and helping fast track those over with the United Way so that anyone who's kind of working with us is getting help with their application and pushing that through. And it's getting sent over to the processing and getting processed in a nice expedited fashion. So that's a pretty big deal right now if you have a tenant who's behind and you need a little bit of extra help navigating that. So we really are excited about some of the benefits that we have to offer right now that are very limited time. Those are not always around, and that's not always the case for these special incentives. So good stuff. And I see you guys are asking questions. Sit tight because we're going to come back and circle back to some of these questions very shortly. So I'm going to keep going and get to the slides with your answers, and we will grab those soon, but keep throwing them at us, okay? All right. So Donna, what does it take to be an owner with our program?
So for an owner to be eligible, it doesn't matter what type of unit they have, multifamily, whether it's a single family, townhouses, condos, all types of units are eligible. The unit does have to pass inspection, and the standards are housing quality standards. So it's not as scary of an inspection as you may think. It's very basic. And it would be the type of things that you would normally have to have if you were renting to anyone, if you wanted to live there yourself. You know, is a window broken? Yeah, that's not going to pass. You know, handrails, chip and paint, things like that. It's not an onerous burden. The lease has to comply with Rhode Island state law. If you want any kind of tips or information about what should be in the lease and what should not be in the lease, Michael Crane, who did the webinars the past 2 times, it's on our website and you could check those out. The rent has to be reasonable and within HUD limits. What limit? HUD publishes the fair market rents every year. And we have to set the maximum subsidy anywhere between 90 and 110%. So we go on the high end. We have a very high rental market. So the east side is 110% of the fair market rent, and the rest of the city is 107. So that's what we use, and that's the maximum subsidy. So what happens is the maximum subsidy less the tenant's portion is more or less what the housing authority would pay, would pay the difference.
Now, are there any limitations, disqualifications? Is there, I mean, it sounds like anyone can be part of the program and rent a unit, right?
Most people. You can't rent to immediate family members. You can't rent to your parents, grandparents, your children, your grandchildren, siblings. That includes like step parents and stepchildren, or your spouse. And that's to any member in the household. So say you had a woman that came to you and she has 2 children, and one of those children is your grandchild. It doesn't matter that you're not related to the head of the household. It's you cannot have one of those relationships to any person in the family. Now, the only exception is if the family has applied for reasonable accommodation and it has been approved. So if you have a unit that has handicap ramps or things like that for a wheelchair and whatever type of issue, accommodations that you have that are special, you may be able to, the family may be able to apply for reasonable accommodation. If it's approved, they may be able to live in that unit. One of the other things is you can't be suspended or barred from HUD as a contractor. You cannot have committed fraud in a program, and you can't have been committing drug trafficking. So those are the things, pretty serious things, and we don't usually find those kind of things to make owners ineligible, but they're there.
Very rare, obligated to talk about it. Great, you guys are throwing out some amazing questions, and I'm holding them for a couple more minutes, but we are getting to them because these are really good questions, and I know we're getting to the part about the rent in particular, as well as some of the questions that are coming in about how to kind of manage the expectations and enforce the lease. So we will be getting to those as well in just a moment. So I'm going to move us forward into how to screen a tenant. It's a good one.
Did we go past one?
Did we? Oh yeah, we did. How about this one? Advertising.
So to advertise your unit, we have our accessing home coordinator, who's Caroline Hogan. And contact information. She's here to help give the information to the tenants. Anyone looking for units, she can share that with them. You can advertise at Housing Search Rhode Island or any other places that you normally advertise. Some owners do ask, oh, can you come out and like pre-approve my house and inspect it? It's like, no, the tenant has to find you first. So once the tenant has found you, they'll give you a piece of paper to fill out, and then they'll bring it to us and we'll proceed from there.
So if you are interested, Caroline can help kind of coordinate, connect you to some tenants. But what's great about that is that it's still, again, up to the tenant just by policy, right? It's a federal policy kind of and rule of the program itself that we can't steer. But we are trying to do the best we can to help advertise these units because you guys are amazing when you join this program. And we want to make sure tenants know about you. What kind of tenant screening? Let's talk about tenant screening, and we're going to answer this one live right now. What kind of screening do we do? And what kind of screening should a partner of ours do?
So the Housing Authority, when we have to determine someone is eligible, we screen for the income eligibility that we talked about to make sure they're under 50% of the AMI. And we check to ensure that there's no violent criminal activity or any drug activity within the past 5 years. So that's what we screen for. And then the owner can use the usual screening methods. And once again, you should check the recent webinars with Michael Crane. He gave a lot of good tips on what you should and should not do to make sure that you're not discriminating against anyone or asking, you know, improper questions.
Yeah, I would just say I'm totally gonna jump in on this one. So you're still, as a participating landlord, you're still responsible for doing the same things you would do with your regular tenants, just to screen them appropriately for what your criteria is, but you have to treat them the same as every other applicant you have coming through your door. And then I will say that I highly recommend, just as a landlord myself, that you look at somebody with a voucher. If you normally look at, say, credit, or you look at their credit or their income, and you're looking at them and there's 3 people with the same income, say $20,000 a year, one of them has a voucher, the 2 others don't. I would say that just remember that that person with a voucher now has the income, has that voucher to help pay the rent. And then they also have, you know, if they have credit problems in the past, to look at that and say, well, maybe they didn't have a voucher and they were tossing back and forth between rent, food, and all the other expenses it takes to run a household. Now they have a voucher that's limiting how much rent they're paying. They're probably going to do a lot better with their credit and have more success because of that voucher. So just keep those things in mind as you look for tenants in your screening out or in voucher holders as we go along.
And another thing to keep in mind is that if anything happens to one of the tenants, they lose their job or they get more income or whatever, their portion of the rent is always going to change. So you will always get the whole pie.
You get that whole pizza.
Yeah, the portions, I like pie.
Yeah, all right.
The portions will change, but you have better security because you know you will get your whole rent than if you have a tenant that is not assisted, and if they lose their job, they can't make the full rent.
Donna, when we do the calculation and screening for income qualifications, do we look at monthly expenses for the income eligibility? We've had a question about that.
No, for the income eligibility, it's their straight income. There's no deductions or anything then. Once they're on the program, they that's when we take into consideration certain deductions that HUD requires.
So when they
Deductions
first
for
start with the
children.
program, okay, so when they start with the program, we look at the income.
Right, we look at the gross income.
And then after that, every time we go back and look at their income and recertify them to make sure that they're remaining compliant with the program, then we look at things like childcare, healthcare expenses, and those things
Yes.
to change up the portion that they pay,
Right.
not necessarily whether
So
they're
the-
eligible.
Yeah, this portion of their rent will be lower because you would take into consideration child care, medical expenses, how many minors they get a deduction of 485 minors. If it's an elderly family, they get another deduction. So there are standard deductions when we have to calculate the rent.
But the landlord still gets the whole pie.
Always gets the whole pie.
All right.
Okay. So it
Well,
also
you
says
know-
that they have a strong,
Oh.
back a sec, thank you. They have a strong incentive to stay current on the portion of the rent. And that is because if you notify us, if you send them a 5-day demand and say, so-and-so didn't pay their rent this month, we will immediately send them a letter and tell them you need to correct this right away, because if you get evicted, you will lose your voucher.
And we are nice about it. And we do tell them that they should come to us to make sure that we're adjusting their rent if they had something
Exactly.
happen. But we do kind of also make sure that we've got your back. It's a balancing act, but that's why we're around.
Yeah. And one thing is we have more than half the people on the program have been on for 10 years or more. So that shows you that they follow the rules. They're very stable. And we don't have too many people not
Yeah.
doing the right thing.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, so let's talk about rent reasonableness, because I know we have a lot of questions coming in about rent. So let's talk about how we set the rents or approve the rents. Let's talk about this.
Could we go back one?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
So just so you have an idea of what the unit approval process is, we give a form to the voucher holder, and when they come to see your apartment, they'll give you the form. It's called a request for tenancy approval, and it brings it back to us. And it basically lists the property details, your contact information, how much rent you're requesting, who's going to pay for which utilities. You do not have to include all utilities. You could include some, you don't have to include some or any. So that's a personal choice. The Housing Authority reviews the reasonable rent. So we have certain parameters. If the rent you're asking for is reasonable, then it can be approved. However, we also have limitations by HUD where the tenant can't pay anything more than 40% of their income. So we have a maximum subsidy. When you figure out how much the tenant's going to pay, if the tenant would have to pay more than 40%, they can't take that unit. So then what happens is once we have the request for tenancy approval, the representative will call you. They'll talk about the reasonableness of the rent. They might say, what you have is fine. They might say, it's going to be too much for the tenant. Can you go down $25 or whatever? So they'll try to negotiate the rent to still make it workable if you can, but you have the ultimate decision. And then we'll ask for the lead conformance certificate, that's Rhode Island state law, whether the person is subsidized or not subsidized. For units that are not owner occupied, you have to provide a lead conformance certificate, which is not the same as being lead safe or, being abated or anything like that. It's just, it's less strict. So we'll schedule the inspection. The new COVID protocols are that we're asking that only the owner be there to let the inspector in, just one person. And a mask is required so that he can go in and he'll do his inspection. And one of the most important things is please don't call for an inspection or say it's ready until it's completely ready, like move-in ready, so that it's swept, there's not tools all over the floors and the counters, there's not work in progress. Because what happens is the inspector can't pass the unit until he sees with his own eyes that the work is completed. So if you call and say, I'm gonna have it ready for next Wednesday, and comes Wednesday, something happened and you're not ready, please call and cancel it so we can schedule for another day, because the inspector is only gonna have to come back again.
I know there's some questions on lead conformance certificates. The Department of Health has a list on their website, and I will have later on in the session as we start to wrap up, I'll make sure that we get that posted into the chat box, the link to the list of inspectors. You call an inspector, they come out and you get that, they inspect your unit and then issue that certificate. But if you're interested in that whole process, we are going to be doing a webinar on November 16th, I believe. And we are going to have some lead experts joining us for that session to talk more about that. So really digging deep into the weeds on that one is a lot of fun because it is state law, and there's a big push from Department of Health to really make sure that that's being followed. So awesome question. And move-in ready. Got to have that move-in ready, right? If you're waiting on appliances, cancel that appointment, right, Donna?
Yes, please.
So now we'll talk a little bit more about rent and what goes into rent reasonableness, because this is a big one for everyone. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that, you know, what we pay, what's reasonable, and how we calculate it. So Donna, spill some tea. How do you calculate rent?
So as I said before, we have a maximum subsidy, which is based on the fair market rent that HUD publishes. We put it as high as we can. Some places set it at 90%, but we do 107% for the city and 110% for the east side. The fair market rent this year did go up substantially. It went up about 6.5%, which is good for both the owners and for the participants to find units more easily. Those will go into effect in January. And the rent reasonableness test, we have to do that at least annually. We have to research what the common rents are by different bedroom sizes. So while the rent is reasonable, sometimes it's more than the 107%. And that just means that the tenant would have to pay more than 30% of their income, which is okay as long as it's not more than 40%. So, for example, if rent in a 2-bedroom on the east side was $1,200 and it is reasonable, the tenant would pay, say their portion is $150 plus the additional $34, which is over our 1166 payment standard. So the housing authority would pay $1,016 and the tenant would pay the balance. However, if it was $1,250, it'll be over the tenant's 40%. So that particular tenant wouldn't be able to move into that unit.
So again, I think what's great is that we will contact you if it, and look through this stuff. Fair market rent is a HUD determined subsidy, and they look at the past 3 years and they take an average for the 3 years prior. So just remember that that's usually a good calculation, but we can go above that. We go 110 up to 110% above that rent. But then we also do the calculation of what's considered reasonable, and that's comparing like units, just like you would in the real estate market, just a regular old market study. We look at it and go, okay, these 3 units have granite countertops and they're charging $1,000. You have Formica and you're trying to charge $1,100. It's probably not comparable. What's going on there? And that sets off, that gives us, you know, are they the same? Are they a little different? What are we looking at? And we make sure to compare those apples to apples to make sure that everything is lined up and it's fair and reasonable. Because back in the day, I'm sure there's a lot of people who remember when, you know, some folks would jack up the rent because they knew the federal government was helping pay for it. And so you'd have tenants who were paying a lot more than the program would be paying a lot more than what everyone else in the neighborhood would be paying. So that's part of why that law came into existence.
This is Peter. I just want to bring up a question that was put in that Carlos Vargas asked. I think, you know, he had in mind the question of, is it possible that we would require somebody to lower the rent, you know, after from 1 year to the next? And maybe he had in mind the idea that it's very rare, but that the fair market rent could go down. Would we then be in a situation where we'd ask for the rent to be lowered? Donna, could you address that?
So at all times, the rent has to be reasonable. But after the first year, actually, the tenant is able to pay more than 40%. If they decide they want to stay there, they would be able to stay there if the rent was reasonable. Do you have to lower it? No, you don't have to. If you want to make it more affordable for your tenant, you know, that's a personal decision, but.
But I guess the one thing we should add is that certainly in recent years, the fair market rents have not at all been going down. So that those would only go down if HUD believed that rents in the area were going down, which is not something in, you know, in Providence we've been seeing anytime recently.
So it's definitely too. So again, you're matching the market. And so if the market goes down, you're probably already going to be lowering your rent because the market's going down. So it's not anything that would ever surprise you or sneak up on you as a landlord. And you can always, again, negotiate with us or work with us as a landlord with us to either say, yes, I want to keep going, or no, wait a minute, this rent isn't what I need to make ends meet. So that's great. Peter, could you put the FMRs in the chat box so that everyone has a link to the FMRs that are current? And I know everyone, just so you know, we do put up the FMRs, but again, those are not the end all be all, because 1, they're changing again in January, and 2, we do go above the FMR. So they're a little bit deceptive. So I just want to, we'll get you those, but I do want to just remember that those aren't exactly what we would approve. So we're going to jump in. There's a lot more questions. We're going to keep going while Peter is looking for that and putting that into the chat box for everyone to view. Let's talk a little bit about inspections, because this is a big one that can be scary for folks. We do that unit inspection. So Donna, tell me about the inspection process.
So as we explained, we need the like conformance certificate. And when you're ready, when the unit is moving ready, let us know. And the inspector comes out very quickly. Either the owner or the agent must be present, because obviously they're the ones with the keys. We have had some owners that said, oh, can I just leave the door open and the inspector can let himself in? No, someone has to be there. It has to be either the owner or the agent to let him in. And he'll inspect the interior, the exterior, go to the basement. And if there are any deficiencies that need to be repaired so that it would pass inspection, he'll write it up right then and there and give you a copy and his card so that you can call him as soon as everything is completed. He'll come back out, check just those items. And the utilities need to be turned on, even if you're not going to include utilities, but he can't check to make sure that the light switches work if the electricity is not on. He can't test the burners on the stove, make sure the refrigerator is working. So the utilities need to be on, and then if you don't include utilities and the tenant is going to put them on, then they'll do that, later. And the tenant cannot move into the unit until the housing authority tells them that the unit has passed inspection and is authorized to move in. So we can't pay for any days that the unit has not passed inspection. So we can't say, oh, I'm gonna move in for December 1st and on November 25th, can I move in? If it hasn't passed inspection and doesn't pass inspection until the 30th, no, they cannot move in. And the other thing is appliances. Make sure the appliance is there and working. If the refrigerator hasn't been delivered or something's missing, it's only going to cause the inspector to come back. Okay.
And somebody asked about FMR, I know we're not on that slide anymore, but we will bring it back up again. It's the fair market rent. It's the average rent for the past 3 years in an area. And it's the kind of what HUD sets out as the basic standard for what rent should look like in your community. That's a good question. Always stop us for acronyms. We're giving you too much jargon, you tell us, okay? And then, let's see, we're gonna go on to examples of these standards. Let's talk about the standards you guys look for in inspections.
So, basically it's not anything more than what you would expect to live in a unit yourself. It has kitchen has to have a permanent light fixture. It has to have a stove, a refrigerator, an outlet, one other type of lighting, sink with hot and cold water. The bathroom needs to have a toilet and a sink. It has to be private. We need smoke alarms on each level. One outside the bedroom areas. And no peeling or chipping paint. Now, these aren't the only items, but these are, you can see it's very basic. Things like handrails. If you have 4 steps or more, it needs to have a handrail, which is good for you as well. It causes, less liability. Somebody has something to grab on if they're falling down the stairs. And these reports are not provided to the city. This is for the housing authority's use, goes in the tenant file, that it passed inspection, or that, say, the light fixture had to be fixed, and that it was fixed and it passed inspection. So the housing quality standards are not that difficult. It's not as strict as code enforcement. So that's,
Obviously, we don't want our folks to live in places that you wouldn't live in. I always just tell landlords, not to be afraid of the inspection process, not to be afraid of what the AUS housing quality standards. And on November 16th, Peter did put a link in the chat about this, because we will talk a little bit more about and get really deeper dive into this. Basically, you want to rent something that you would live in, and that's just that meets the basic standards of living, and that's the best way to kind of think about what we're going to come in and look at. Is it safe? Is it sanitary? Great. Good question. Is the peeling and chipping paint inside and outside, Donna?
Inside and outside,
So they look at inside and outside.
yes.
Um,
If you had chipping paint and it was in the winter and you can't paint, there are extensions for things like that. But overall, it needs to be painted, not chipped.
That's a good practice anyway, just because if you have, you know, depending on who's living there, it's just better, especially if it's pre-1978. That's something that you could get in a lot of trouble for if you don't address it, whether you're in the program or not.
And often people say, but it doesn't matter if it's chipping or peeling because there's no children under 6, or it's only an elderly woman that it doesn't matter. No matter who's living there, it can't have chipped or peeling paint.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the lease because we have some great questions coming in about the lease. So why don't we talk a little bit about what goes into the lease, and then I'll ask you a couple of questions, Donna, from our folks.
So the lease is only between the tenant and the owner. The housing authority is not a party to the lease, which means the owner is the person that needs to enforce the lease and make sure that the tenant complies with all the provisions of the lease. We need a copy of it for our files, but it's ultimately the owner's responsibility to enforce the lease. There can't be any side deals. You can't ask tenants to pay additional money. Things like that would be a violation as well. The housing authority and the owner actually sign a housing assistance payment contract, and that's what allows us to send you the portion on behalf of the tenant. So that's the contract between the housing authority and the owner. And what do we need? All you need is, we need a picture ID, the verification of your social security card or your business number, the TIN, because of course you're going to get a 1099 at the end of the year and the names and numbers have to match. So what happens sometimes is an owner might have something in their name, but it's owned by a business and they give us the wrong social security number. Whoever the check is going to, whoever the owner is, the social security number needs to match. We need proof of ownership for the property. And if there's more than one owner, the owner that's going to be the person that's basically the agent that's going to deal with the issues, or who we need to contact needs to be authorized. You know, that this is the person that has a responsibility for it. The tenants are responsible for the security deposit, which of course with Rhode Island state law can't be more than 1 month's rent. The housing authority does have some programs to help the tenants with social security, the security deposits, and Ainsley can explain some of that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, what's great is if you have a tenant who comes to you and who's working with us and they end up saying, I can't do this, you know, there's one of two ways to handle it. In a regular time, a lot of the landlords who work with our tenants will say, okay, let's break it up over, say, 6 months, and you can portion it out and pay a portion of the security deposit every month. What's great is right now we have something that kind of negates that, and that this Blue Cross Blue Shield money allows us to help pay for security deposits if folks can't make it or they can't make the whole thing. We are doing some security deposit assistance for tenants who are struggling with that. Likewise, if they're having trouble, say they wouldn't be able to turn on their utilities, and you find out, because sometimes they'll tell you as a potential landlord, but they won't necessarily disclose to us that say they owe a balance on National Grid or an oil company, so they can't get the utilities turned on right away. If you hear that, you can always let us know, and we have some funding that can help with some of those things up front. Don, I'm going to ask you this question. Security deposit or pets, pet rents, are those allowable in the lease? What do you, I know Michael Crane talked about this in our session on lease, on the lease and unreasonable accommodations. So I would encourage folks to go back to that on YouTube and check those out. But maybe you could say a little bit more about the pets and those extra fees.
So the pets, you have to be very careful what is a pet and what is a service animal. But as Ainsley said, the best thing to do is watch the webinar that Michael Crane did that really goes into it in detail so that you're not caught up in that.
And Donna, can we ask first month and security? I mean, last month and security, or first month and security, last month and security, what can you offer?
Just 1 month security deposit.
And then can you get the first month up? First month is due when they move in, right?
Right. When they move in, they get the first month, but first month, last month security deposit, that's not in
State law.
State law.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. All
So
right.
any of the changes to the lease after we sign the lease and the contract, if anything changes, the housing authority has to be notified ahead of time in writing. So if you decided that somebody else can move in, we need to know that because we have to screen that person and we have to make changes to the rent and things like that. If you decide that you were including utilities, but you no longer want to, we have to do another lease and make those changes because it all affects the tenant's portion of the rent. The same, either way, we've had owners say, oh, the tenant can't handle the utility bills anymore, and I'd like to include them, or, you know, so that they don't have to move. I'd rather pay the bills. Then those kind of things we always need to know. So it's important that you always let us know ahead of time.
Yeah. And now if somebody, so yes, you did hear correctly. First, last, and security is not allowed by Rhode Island law. You can charge your first month's rent is your payment, and then you can charge either the last month's rent or security. But what you get from that person, you cannot charge more than that 1 month of rent. So that's very important to note and to know. That's a big one that a lot of folks get caught up on, thinking from other states, especially if you're managing a unit in, say, Massachusetts normally. You may miss that in Rhode Island law, but it is not allowable. So you did hear that correctly. I have another one. Oh, go ahead, Donna.
No, I was going to say, in the security deposit is the full month's rent. It's not just the tenant's portion of the rent. So you're limited to the tenant's portion. It's what the housing authority and the tenants pay. That would be the security maximum security deposit.
Right. So if your full rent, that whole pie is $1,100, that can be what your security deposit is. Not limited to, say, the $100 tenant portion. If somebody is trying to move someone in or violate the lease, say somebody has a change to the lease, they're moving somebody in who's not on the lease, Donna. Is that something we have to approve that, right?
We have to approve it because we have to screen the person. If somebody wanted to add someone and you didn't want that person in the household, then that's the other part of it. When we do our screening, when we do our screening before we even put that person on the lease, we ask the owner, do you give permission for this person to be added to the lease?
And I will jump over for a second, hashtag office life. That's genuine right there. I'll say too, that if you have somebody on the lease, your lease is the most important tool for you, whether you work with the PHA's programs or not, whether you're taking a Section 8 voucher or not. Your lease is, and your HAP contract, your assistance contract, if you have one and you're working with somebody who is on the program, those are really important documents, and it is your responsibility to make sure you're following them. If your lease says that these are the 3 people who are allowed to live here, and somebody's trying to move in, you can come to us, we can help you with that. But again, if you don't want that person to live there and you find out they've been sleeping over and you have a no overnight guest policy or whatever, it's time to send a non-compliance, and you need to document that and make sure to share that notice. If it's with somebody who's working with the PHA, share it with us too. But you need to document that. And that is the best way to make sure that your lease is being followed. Put all of that in writing, make sure that that's documented. And I think that's one of the things I've learned from listening to the past 2 sessions of our webinar series is that document. If you're changing something, when Donna said, if you're going to change the utilities or help somebody out or go off the lease, don't do it. If you're tempted to do it, don't do it. You may feel like you're being a nice person, but you really want to make sure you're doing everything by the book and on the up and up, whether it's a Section 8 tenant or not, to protect yourself. Wouldn't you agree, Donna?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I also want to, I know Peter's going to jump in just a second, but I do want to point out that we do ask for a couple of extra pieces of paper if you do work with the Section 8 program. We ask for something called a W-9, which is a tax form, and we ask for a voided check or bank verification. And that is because we want to make sure that we're paying you quickly and consistently. And that direct deposit is so important. It's a great thing for us to be able to offer. And so that's why we ask for that information, because that's going to get set up and get you set up to get your money right to the bank. At least the PHA portion, direct deposited every month consistently at the first business day of the month. Peter, did you have something to jump in with?
There were just a couple questions where I thought it may be helpful to let the person speak and ask the question, but I don't. One was from Aditya, was asking about selling a house where there's somebody in the house with a voucher, but I just wasn't sure exactly what was being asked, so I'm just going to see if you want to ask the question live. But you may be.
Unmute. There we go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. So I am actually in the process of buying an apartment building, and it does have a Section 8 in it currently, and I don't think it's with you guys, but just generally, do we need to contact that agency to do an inspection and all that if we haven't once we acquire the property?
Okay, so if it's a lease that's already in progress, you should call the housing authority and tell them that you intend to buy the property and when the closing is. But it may not necessarily mean that you need to have an inspection, because
Gotcha.
it could have already been done for that year.
Okay.
It won't be until the tenant's recertification, dependent on the housing authority.
Okay.
Donna, does he have to keep that tenant?
He would have to give notice if he didn't want to have that tenant, but he could just assume the lease and the payments would go on.
So you'd want to contact them to make sure you got that, whoever the agency is, your direct deposit info.
Right.
So to keep those payments coming.
No. And then would,
And then the
if
same.
if there was a lease, then would in the past, right? So if the seller doesn't have the lease, like maybe they bought it also for some time, that housing authority would have that copy of the lease from whenever they're part of the Section 8 program, I assume, correct?
Yes, we would.
Okay.
So we would give you the lease, and if it was, we would give you a copy of the original lease. You would assume it, and we would give you a copy of the most recent lease amendment so that you would know what portions you're supposed to collect. And if there's anything that you do want to change, like maybe, I don't know, maybe there was something about pets, maybe the other owner didn't want pets and you do. So any change, or you don't want to include utilities, we would have to give notice to the tenant, and we could do a new lease and, you know, get everything situated that way.
Thank you.
You know.
Great. And we're very excited for your new purchase. I know you've been on the past few seminars, so we appreciate you being here, and we're very excited for your new units.
The one other one that there's a question, and unless somebody else knew what this was about, there's a question from Dustin that would have been in response to something we were talking about. And I'm going to just see if he wants to ask the question. And if not, he can type something else in to clarify the question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, the fair market rents include utilities. So how do you know what rent you can charge if you're not planning on including utilities?
So that's a good question. We also have to annually do a utility allowance survey. So we know what the average utility consumption and payment would be dependent on the bedroom size. And we back that out of the maximum subsidy. So usually when the tenants come to you, they'll know what the limits are. You can always ask us as well, but we do have a chart that would say, you know, with utilities, it would be, you know, maybe $900, and without utilities, it would be $900. And maybe if all the utilities were included, it would be $11.
And what's posted on the fair market, like I'm looking at it right now and it says for 2020, a one bedroom is $898.
Mm-hmm.
So that would include heat and electricity?
Heat, electricity, however you heat the hot water.
So if I didn't want to include utilities, what rent could I expect instead of the $898?
So it would be, it depends how many, so it's a one bedroom.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're putting her on the spot and making her do math, Dustin.
This is Peter. I just want to add one thing just to point out, and that those numbers that you're looking at, as we mentioned before, we do go 7% above the numbers, at least for 0, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
So just to keep that in mind too, that our total goes above the fair market rent.
Right. So for one bedroom, it would be $960 is the maximum. And what we figure the utilities usually are, if you're not paying, if you have gas heat or is about $143. So you just subtract the 143 from the 960. And that would be, you know, the basic contract rent.
Okay, and it's similar for like a 2-bedroom. I mean, not that amount necessarily, but that's
right. But the same process.
General process. So the base rent would be
right.
like 960 minus the 143. And then I also had questions about workforce housing and how that works, because I know that goes a little bit higher. And I'm just not who's the best person that I could even speak to about that, like making a place workforce housing.
This is Peter. I think if we can get in touch with you after, I would say that it might be talking to people from Rhode Island Housing, because workforce housing, as far as what I think you're asking about, really is typically around kind of a long-term subsidy contract. So it's not it's not a tenant-based voucher type, like our program is tenant-based where the tenant takes the voucher and they find an apartment. Whereas workforce housing is more like you develop some housing and you have a long-term contract or a long-term subsidy that you say, I'm going to rent to people within a certain income range and I'm going to be allowed to charge certain rents and things like that. So it's more of a formal long-term type of program, I would say, but they're in the opportunities to get funding for that, from what I understand, is really mostly at the state level.
That's exactly what I'm interested in. In addition to this, they're unrelated, but I just wasn't sure who to like.
So Dustin, we'll get in touch with you off after this. We'll send you some contacts and
Okay,
we'll
great.
connect you to Rhode Island Housing and to some folks in the city who
Great.
may be able to connect you with programs that'll help.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Great questions. Great questions. We do have a question, Donna. Is direct deposit for a tenant safe and taking their portion of the rent via direct deposit? I think that's a personal preference question, but I'm going to just verify with
Yeah.
you.
I would think so as well.
It's really what you're comfortable with as a landlord. I tell my tenants I don't like when they give me cash, but that's because I'm a weirdo who likes to not go to the bank. I like to be able to click on my phone to deposit a check. And they know my preference, but it's really up to you and what your preferences are, right?
We usually ask is if a tenant, we usually tell the tenants to pay by check or money order, not cash, but if they do give you cash, please give them a receipt, because at the time of recertification as well, they have to give us something to show that their rent is paid to date. And it's always good because then no disputes arise as to who owes who. And I paid it and he took cash, and so to better protect yourself, check on money order is better. One other thing I wanted to mention as well is if your bank changes, if you change accounts, you close account, if you move, please let us know so we know how to get in touch with you. Surprisingly, we have a lot of landlords who their checks bounce back from the bank because they've closed the account and haven't called us to tell us where to send it, as well as because they get their rents direct deposit, they forget that we still need to send letters for how much the tenant owes, did the portions change, when we're coming out for inspection. So all those things they forget that we always need your current address, and email address is even better a lot of times to get in touch with you, and phones. So contact information is important.
So I think that's a perfect segue into the tenant's responsibilities. And a lot of the questions you guys have been asking are about some of the tenant responsibilities. So what are the tenant's responsibilities on the Section 8 program?
So their responsibilities are outlined on their voucher. They're required to always pay their rent on time, abide by the terms of the lease, keep their apartment clean, don't have boarders and lodgers, anything you would normally expect. They have to abide by the terms of the lease. They have to comply with their voucher program obligations as well, which means they have to come in for annual recertifications. They have to provide us their current income accurately. They can't sublease or transfer the unit to anybody else. And usually we have very few people that lose their voucher because they've been evicted. In the past years, we've only had maybe 6 people, an average of 6 people a year, to actually lose their voucher because they didn't comply with the lease and were evicted.
So that's like 6 people out of 2700.
700.
Very low rate. If you compared to some of the other, just your regular market expectation for if a tenant's going to be evicted. I think it's a great to point out, and I know we're getting short on time, so we are getting close to wrapping up, but whether the tenant has a voucher or not, they are responsible for following the lease. And you as a landlord are responsible for making sure that the lease is followed. And that documentation of those things is really important to cover yourself and to keep your business working. And this is if you think about it like a business, or think about it as a revenue generator, an income generator, that's really important for you to make sure you're doing, whether you're with our program or not. And we can't stress that enough. A lot of the problems that we see coming in our door could have been solved with a notice to the tenant, or or making sure that the first time it happened, or that it was documented and a non-compliance was sent out. So those are really important to show. It's also really important to make sure you check on your tenants and you're over there, and that you give the 48 hours, but that you're doing a regular inspection of a unit to make sure that tenants are following the responsibilities that they have, and that they are complying with what you've outlined as responsibilities as a good tenant for your lease and for your unit. Donna, would you add anything to that? No? All right. Owner's responsibilities. So I'm going to jump into this one because I just gave you the whole spiel about it mostly, but you are responsible for screening the tenants. Be very careful about discrimination. We hear a lot of stories about, and we covered this in one of our last seminars, but my other tenants said they don't want that screaming kid. And so I don't want to lease to them. It gets into sticky territory, and we don't want anyone to get in trouble. So just be very cognizant of the fact that you really shouldn't. You should look at the big picture of everyone, and beware of discrimination. We can provide you with the past landlord's, previous landlord contact information, and you can do reference checks that way for any tenants that come with a voucher. But again, if you're doing that, you want to make sure you're doing that for all the applicants in your pool, and not just for the ones that we're sending you. You have to abide by the provisions of the lease with the tenant, and then with the HAP contract. That's the Housing Assistance Payment Contract that you have as part of your lease. And then anytime you issue a notice, you want to make sure that you're copying the PHA or your housing authority along with the tenant. And that's, again, because we want to make sure we know what's going on. If we can help in any way, we want to make sure we're doing that. And you have to keep the unit in decent working order. It's got to be in that condition that'll pass inspection, which we've already talked about. So Donna, what is the difference between a regular tenant and a Section 8 tenant?
It's not much. You still have all the same responsibilities. With Section 8 tenant, you're guaranteed your rent.
Yeah. All right. So rent increases. We already covered a little bit of this, but Donna, cover this one.
So within the first year of the lease, you cannot request a rent increase. However, when it's getting ready, if you're going to keep the tenant after the first year, you have to request it in writing to the housing authority. It needs to be reasonable. We have to ensure we have enough funding available. And we ask that you submit it 90 days prior to the renewal date. So that gives us time. We have to recalculate the tenant's rent. And they need 30-day notice. So that gives us sufficient time so that everything goes smoothly. And at times, if the rent goes up over the maximum standards, the tenant portion may also go up. And it may go up because their income has changed. So that's why we do need to give them extra 30-day notice.
Yep. Awesome. So again, put that rent request, if you are raising the rent, say annually, just like clockwork, that you are putting that in writing and you are keeping in mind that 90-day date. Talk about inspections. We've already touched on this a little bit, but Give us some more
So-
info on that.
Yeah, so before, we used to have to do inspections every year. Right now, we only have to do them every 2 years. If the tenant has a complaint that hasn't been addressed, they're always told to contact the owner or the agent first to let them know the burner on the stove isn't working or whatever. And if it's not addressed, then we will send the inspector out and send you a notice to please comply and the compliance so that there's not a problem. Most items are given 30 days to have everything completed, but there's health and safety issues that have to be corrected in 24 hours. So what would that be? If there was a gas leak, there's sewerage in the basement, there's, smoke alarms aren't working. Those would all be 24-hour. But we're going to go into that even more on the 16th when the webinar will be exclusively about inspections. And what happens is the impact on the HAP contract in the payments. If you have 30 days to correct something, the inspector goes back out and it's not corrected, then the payment is abated, and that's by federal regulation. We have to hold the payment, not hold it, we have to abate it. So you'll only get payment again once it's corrected and it has passed inspection. So you don't want to lose any days worth of rent, and you cannot collect that portion from the tenant. So the tenant can only pay their portion of the rent. You can't say because the housing authority didn't pay me, the tenant has to pay. You can't do that.
And that's similar to, again, a regular tenant. If you have a broken stove and they've requested to have repair and say you didn't replace it or repair it, they have the right to work some of that out and withhold some rent for that issue and deal with it through legal channels. And so it's the same as if you had a regular tenant. Just to note that it's just that the payments again come through us, and so we're more likely to make sure that that's actually happening in those rare instances, and they are rare. Fraud, another rare thing that we do have to talk about because it is an obligation under the program rules. One of the big ones is, and the most common when we talk about fraud, is having those side agreements with the tenant. Say you wanted $1,300 for the rent, and again, we only approved that $1,100 pie. You can't tell the tenant, all right, so on the side, I need that extra $200. You can't do that. Same thing with something simple like you're going to give them a break on the rent and take $25 off if they're doing the landscaping every month. Those things have to be in the lease. They have to be spelled out. And those have to be listed out very clearly. Otherwise, those are things that raise red flags. What are some of the other ones, Donna?
The owner may not live in the unit with the tenant. They can't rent to immediate family. You can't allow others to move there. You can't allow boarders to move in and not say anything or charge the boarder extra rent. Anything that happens, the housing authority needs to know. We do have a fraud investigator. If you have an issue, you see any kind of fraud, you can call and leave a message for the fraud investigator. Leave as much detail as possible. Everything is confidential. But it's always good to leave your name and a telephone number, because a lot of times people know more than they think to leave as a message. And he may have other questions to help him get to the root of the problem. And it's always better to talk to a person than to just, leave a message. And there could be other information that would help us. So his number is at the bottom of the screen, 709-2219.
Yep, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about what's next. We have seminar coming up, another live Zoom session coming up November 16th. We've said it about 10 times now, but repetition gets it in there. We want everyone to register for that. The link is live on Facebook and on our website, and that website is www.provhousing.org/landlord. We also have more coming in the winter and spring. We mentioned a little bit more about bookkeeping and some of those other topics. Those are coming, so stay tuned. Keep posted on our website and social media. We'll also kind of send out updates as we book those. So now that you've attended one session, we'll keep you posted as to some of those other ones that are coming up. We also had somebody ask about repeating the financial incentives. So here's what we have. A limited time, you can get up to $1,000 extra for a variety of different things. We're offering $500 if you lease to one of our special mainstream or VASH participants. So again, those are like veterans, somebody in the household may be disabled. So those are kind of a unique population. And so if you're leasing to one of those special vouchers that we have teed up right now, and we have several ready to go and looking for units, that's an extra $500. If you're a first-time participant in the Section 8 program, and you sign a 1-year lease with a Section 8 participant of ours, we will do a $500 bonus incentive. Boom. Or if you have a neighborhood, a unit in one of the neighborhoods of opportunity, we kind of have a map with the orange is some of those neighborhoods, but follow up with us and talk to, again, Caroline's information is provided in just a second. Follow up with any one of us. We'll check if your unit's in one of those neighborhoods. If it is, that's another $500. So up to a total of $1,000 extra money that we're giving out right now to help landlords out and to encourage participation with us in our program. We're hoping that they're going to be available into 2021, but right now we're trying to make sure that we get as many people, tell as many people as we can, get as many people to use these incentives as possible, because we don't know how long they're going to last. And we're going to cross our fingers that they're around a little bit longer and that Blue Cross keeps funding them, but we aren't 100% on that. So join us now. So we're going to provide you with Caroline's information. She's our accessing home coordinator, and she is working very closely with many landlords and our tenants and voucher holders to match them up, to get them connected, and to help provide resources. You can visit us online at provhousing.org/landlord, where we post a lot of rules and regulations, tips, tools, incentives, updates, classes. It's all on there in one place, nice and easy to find. And we also encourage you to follow us on social media, because we have a lot of great tips and tools that we post up there as well. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Before we finish, I want to say thank you on behalf of Donna and myself and Peter and the whole PHA team. We do ask that you complete, there's a quick survey when you leave the meeting. We ask that you complete that survey. We also, it gets emailed to you as well if you didn't get it on the way out, but we do ask that you give us feedback, because we are trying to set up some more sessions into 2021. And did I miss anything? No, I went really fast. Does anyone have any questions? Because I kind of sped through those last few slides. I'm waiting. No, I'm not seeing any. Okay. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for being here tonight. If you do have follow-up questions, oh, here they come. The recording will be sent to you for future reference. It will be sent. It will be also posted on the landlord page of our website, so you can access it there, or Caroline will be emailing everyone who participated today, so you can access this and review the session as well. So that's a great question. So thank you very much. That's why we're recording. Please share and let other folks know if you know anyone else. And we really appreciate you all being here. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you on the 16th, hopefully. Have a good night.